In the summer of 1931, a 66-year-old man named Adolph Ruth walked into a range of mountains east of Phoenix, Arizona, carrying a map he believed would lead him to a lost gold mine. He told his family he would be gone 2 weeks. 6 months later, an expedition crossing the area found his skull. There were 2 holes in it. The rest of his remains were discovered some distance away, along with his belongings and a checkbook. Inside it, in Ruth's own handwriting, were the words Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Below them he had written directions, as if, in his final days, Adolph Ruth believed he had actually found what he was looking for. The story made newspapers across the country. It was not the first death in these mountains. It would be nowhere near the last. The range is called the Superstition Mountains. For more than a century, people have walked into them chasing the same legend, a vein of gold so rich it has been called the greatest lost mine in America. And with remarkable regularity, some of them have not walked out. Treasure hunters, experienced hikers, modern searchers with GPS and helicopters overhead. The list of the dead and the missing kept growing decade after decade into our own time. And long before any of them arrived, before the miners, before the maps, before the legend of the gold itself, the Apache people already had a name for this place. They said these mountains were not meant to be entered, that something powerful lived inside them, and that those who went in without respect would not come back. Today we're examining the historical records, the Apache traditions, and more than a century of documented deaths and disappearances surrounding one question. Why do people keep dying in the Superstition Mountains? Is it geography, heat, cliffs, and human greed doing exactly what they always do? Or did the people who knew these mountains first understand something about them that we still refuse to take seriously? To understand what the Apache said about the superstitions, you have to forget the gold entirely. In the oldest traditions connected to these mountains, there is no treasure. There is a boundary. According to traditions attributed to the Apache and recorded by settlers, soldiers, and ethnographers from the 19th century onward, the Superstition Mountains held an opening, a passage leading down into the world below this one. Some accounts describe it as a cave or a hole from which the winds were born. The dry, violent gusts that still tear through these canyons were said to blow out from that lower world. Others connected the range to the dwelling place of the thunder god, a being of storms and sudden anger, whose ground was not to be disturbed. What the accounts agree on is the rule. The deep interior of these mountains was not a place for the living. Hunting near the edges, passing along the known trail, that was one thing. Going into the heart of the range, digging into it, taking from it, that was another matter entirely. The mountains were sacred in the old sense of the word, the sense that has less to do with peace and more to do with power. Sacred meant dangerous. Even the name the range carries today is a record of how outsiders reacted to those beliefs. When Spanish and later American settlers heard the Pima people of the Salt River Valley speak of the mountains, the strange sounds, the disappearances, the spirits said to dwell there, they dismissed all of it with a single word: superstition. The name on every map of Arizona today is, quite literally, a monument to the warnings nobody listened to. But here is what makes the superstitions different from other cursed places attached to old legends. In most of those places, the legend is all there is. Here, the warnings were followed by a body count, one that is not folklore at all, but a matter of public record, with names, dates, and newspaper coverage. And it began with gold. Before we continue, if you enjoy documentaries that explore forgotten history through historical records, archaeology, and indigenous traditions, consider subscribing. It helps the channel and allows me to keep researching stories like this one. Because the chain of events that turned an Apache boundary into America's deadliest treasure hunt can be traced document by document, through three names: a Mexican mining family, a dying German immigrant, and the woman who tried to follow his last words into the mountains. The story the treasure hunters tell begins in the 1840s, when Arizona was still northern Mexico. According to accounts passed down and elaborated for over a century, a mining family named Peralta worked gold claims somewhere in or near the Superstitions, hauling ore back towards Sonora. On their final expedition, the story places it around 1848, the pack train was attacked by Apache warriors and the miners were wiped out almost to a man. The site is remembered to this day as the Massacre Grounds, a name you can still find on hiking maps of the Western Superstitions. How much of the Peralta story is history and how much is legend remains genuinely disputed. But decades later, prospectors reported finding scattered gold ore in the remains of pack animals in that area, finds that were reported in the press at the time, and that kept the story alive. Whatever happened out there, something left traces. Then comes the man the legend is named for. Jacob Waltz was a German immigrant. The Dutchman was simply what Americans called a Deutschman, who had prospected across the West for decades. In his final years, he lived quietly on a small homestead near Phoenix. And in October of 1891, dying under the care of a local woman named Julia Thomas, Waltz is said to have told her the location of a mine of almost unbelievable richness, hidden in the Superstitions. Here the record becomes concrete. Julia Thomas was a real, documented resident of Phoenix. Contemporary newspapers covered what happened next. In 1892, she organized an expedition into the mountains to find the mine Waltz had described. She failed. Broke and exhausted, she began selling copies of the directions, and in doing so she released the legend into the world. The earliest newspaper accounts of the Lost Dutchman's mine date to this period, while the detail that made believers of Skeptics was repeated again and again. Under the dying man's bed there had been a box of gold ore, rich ore that, according to those who claimed to have seen it, did not match any known mine in the region. From that point on, the Superstitions had everything a legend needs: a sacred mountain, a massacre, a deathbed secret, and physical gold. People began to search, and people began to die. Some deaths were unremarkable: heat, falls, thirst. This is Arizona wilderness, and it kills carelessly and often. But other cases refused to fit that pattern, and none more so than the one from 1931. Adolph Ruth was not a reckless man. A government employee from Washington, D.C., he had spent years fascinated by lost mine stories. His son Erwin, working in Mexico, had obtained what were said to be old Peralta maps, documents supposedly tracing back to the mining family itself. In June of 1931, against his family's wishes, the elderly Ruth took those maps into the Superstitions. When he failed to return, search parties combed canyons and found nothing. In December, an archaeological expedition passing through the area found the skull. Forensic examination at the time concluded the two holes in it were consistent with a gunshot, a conclusion that was reported nationally and has been argued about ever since. The rest of his remains turned up the following month, roughly 3/4 of a mile away. His pistol was still with him, unfired. The Peralta map he had carried was gone, and in his checkbook was the triumphant note in Latin, followed by directions to a location he believed held the mine. The official record lists Adolph Ruth's cause of death as undetermined. The newspapers of 1932 were less cautious. And the question they asked is still open: who or what did Adolph Ruth meet in the mountains after he wrote the words, "I conquered"? In the decades that followed, the Lost Dutchman legend grew into the most searched-for lost mine in American history, and the Superstitions kept collecting names. The pattern is documented across the 20th century in coroner's records and local news archives. Prospectors found dead in canyons, searchers who vanished without a trace, remains discovered years later in places search parties swore they had already covered. Some cases became infamous in their own right. In 1947, a retired photographer named James Cravey hired a helicopter to drop him into a remote canyon in the Superstitions, announcing that he would find the Lost Dutchman's mine. When he failed to hike out, searchers found his camp, and nothing else. The following year, his skeleton was discovered wrapped in a blanket near a canyon trail. The skull was missing. It was located weeks later, some 30 feet away. The coroner could not determine how James Cravey died, and the Arizona newspapers that had covered his confident departure now covered the inquest. Cases like his, and there are more of them than any documentary can hold, are part of why the range earned nicknames that have nothing to do with treasure and everything to do with what happens to the people who go in alone. Researchers who have tried to count the legend's toll disagree on the exact number. Some tallies of deaths and disappearances connected to the mountains and the mine run past 100, while strict accounts are lower. But no one disputes the core fact. This specific range of mountains within sight of the suburbs of a major American city has killed a remarkable number of the people who went looking for what it supposedly hides. And it has not stopped. In 2009, a Denver bellhop named Jesse Capon, a quiet man who had spent years privately obsessed with the Dutchman legend, filling his apartment with maps and research, drove to Arizona and walked into the Tonto National Forest side of the range. His camp was found abandoned. For 3 years, nothing. In 2012, searchers finally located his remains wedged in a crevice high on a cliff face, in terrain so difficult that experienced climbers struggled to explain what he had been attempting. And a year after Capon vanished in the July heat of 2010, 3 men from Utah came to search for the mine. All 3 died. The last of their remains were not recovered until the following year. Skeptics, of course, have an answer for all of this, and it deserves to be taken seriously. The Superstitions are a maze of volcanic rock where summer ground temperatures can kill in hours, where cliffs collapse, and where a legend actively selects for the obsessed and the unprepared. Geologists add a deeper problem. Surveys of the range have found that the Superstitions are made of volcanic tuff, rock formations in which large gold deposits are, by every standard model, unlikely to exist at all. By that reading, there is no mine, there never was, and the mountain's victims died for a story. But that conclusion opens questions of its own. If there is no gold in those mountains, what was in the box under Jacob Waltz's bed? Where did the ore reported at the massacre grounds come from? And then there are the stones. In the mid-20th century, a set of carved stone tablets surfaced, the so-called Peralta stones, etched with crosses, trails, and what appear to be map instructions in Spanish. They have been studied, published, displayed in an Arizona museum, denounced as a hoax, and defended as genuine, sometimes by the same institutions in different decades. To this day, no one has conclusively proven who carved them or why. The deeper anyone digs into the superstition record, the stranger the shape of it becomes. A mine that geology says cannot exist, attached to gold that multiple witnesses handled, maps that keep surfacing and keep failing, and a mountain range that, whatever the truth about the treasure, demonstrably keeps ending the lives of the people who search for it, which brings us back to the people who never searched at all. The Apache did not go into the heart of the superstitions looking for gold. By every account we have, they did not go into the heart of the superstitions at all, not because they were afraid of thirst or cliffs, but because the place itself was understood to be off-limits. The interior belonged to something else. Set the two records side by side. The old tradition says This ground is a boundary, it is guarded, and those who enter carelessly will be claimed. The modern record says for 130 years, an unusual number of the people who entered these mountains chasing what they believed was hidden inside them did not come out, and some of the deaths have never been explained. None of this proves a curse. It has never been the purpose of this documentary to claim that it does. Heat is real. Greed is real. A legend that draws obsessive people into lethal terrain will produce bodies without any help from the supernatural. But consider what the Apache warning actually accomplished, whatever its origin. It encoded in a form that survived centuries a set of true statements. That these mountains are unlike the land around them, that they do not forgive intrusion, that people who go in after what they want rather than with respect tend not to return. Every one of those statements has been confirmed name by name in the record of the last century. The question is whether the warning was a way of remembering those facts, or whether the facts are evidence that the warning was right. Perhaps the Peralta gold is still out there, under a volcanic ridge no geologist has sampled. Perhaps the box under Jacob Waltz's bed came from somewhere else entirely, and the greatest lost mine in America is a story that got out of hand, while the mountain quietly did what deserts do. Or perhaps the Apache, who knew this ground longer and better than anyone, drew a line around it for a reason, and the last 130 years are simply what it looks like when no one honors the line. The mountains are still there, less than an hour from Phoenix. The trails into them are open. Every year, people still walk past the warning signs with maps in their pockets, sure that they will be the ones to solve it. And the mountains, as they always have, decide who comes back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy documentaries that explore forgotten history through historical records, archaeology, and indigenous traditions, consider subscribing for more investigations like this. And before you go, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think the deaths in the superstitions are nothing more than heat, terrain, and obsession? Or was the Apache boundary there for a reason? And would you go in with a map if you had one? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next documentary.